Welcome to Freddie's Huge Ask Podcast. Huge lives and the stories behind them. And now here's your host, Freddie Cruz.
Ebony LaDelle is a marketing pusher by day and storyteller by night. And she joins the pod right now to talk about her debut novel, Love Radio. It's my radio voice.
I can tell.
Well, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me, Freddie.
I want to hear your radio voice.
I don't have one. I really don't have one. I don't think I have one. I'm not even going to try. I don't want to embarrass myself.
Well, you know, us radio guys, I'm a retired radio guy, but back when I was in the industry, we would hate it when people would say, "Hey, can you do your radio voice?" Yeah. So anyways.
Yeah. In the book, when people read it, they'll notice that that's one of the things that Prince's friends joke with him about is every time he does a radio voice, they'll imitate him. And he's just like, I don't even talk like that. And then he realizes that he does talk like that.
Yeah.
So that was fun.
Yeah, well, and it's a lot of fun. The story, I finished reading it a couple of nights ago. It's one of those bingeable reads that you can kind of blow through if you don't have anything to do, or if you have a lot to do. You can just blow off the entire world and get through it in an entire afternoon or maybe a couple of nights.
Thank you so much. I was hoping that I wanted it to be fun and lighthearted and joyful, and also still talk about important topics. And it was a labor of love trying to find that balance, but I'm happy to hear from people like yourself that say it's easy to read.
Yeah. Well, okay. So I want to go back though, because you do have quite the career in publishing, however, not as an author. So at what point did you decide, I want to get on the other side?
So interesting enough, I've always wanted to be on the other side. I always wanted to be an author. When I was in elementary school, I'd have my loose leaf paper and I'd staple it together and I'd write little stories and give it to my parents. My mother used to take me to the library like every week. And so that was my way of, digging right into books and having an obsession for it. But then when I went to college, I went to Howard University and I worked at their bookstore. And that was the moment in which I realized that publishing was a business. I had never really witnessed that before, but having authors come in and meeting their publicists and meeting their marketers and realizing like, oh, there's this whole organization dedicated to putting together packaging and distributing books. And that could be really cool to do. And I love marketing. And so I moved to New York, started in the publishing industry, thought that like, okay, I'm actually doing pretty decent at this, worked on like a lot of best-selling books, but I still had that nagging feeling of, Ebony, you want to be a writer. And I think for so long there, especially being a woman of color, there are lanes that you're supposed to stay in. So you can only do one thing. But one of the writers that I mentioned in the book as well, Toni Morrison, is very much an idol of mine. And Toni was a perfect example of someone who wrote phenomenal books and also was an editor and ushered in a lot of great work. And so I had to really think about that as I was trying to push back against this idea that I can only do one thing. There can only be, one facet of my life. And so once I, kind of got over that hurdle and started writing, everything flowed, and Love Radio is what I have to show for it.
I'd love to know what your favorite Toni Morrison book is. Like if I admit, I have no idea who she was. And you mentioned her, and there are some other people who you mentioned in the book as well. I'd love to know who, like for someone who's like me, has never heard of Toni, what is the one book that I've got to get to start with?
I think you have to start with The Bluest Eye. I do. Just because Toni is pushing back against this narrative of skin color and what is considered beauty, what a normal standard of beauty. And for that time, reading a book or writing a book like that was such an act of resistance because Toni came up in a time where segregation was real, where being a Black woman and having a voice could cause a lot of harm your way. And so her choosing to write these stories, her choosing to write stories that center Black women, when many of the critiques that she received was, this would be a great story. I can't wait to where Toni writes for all people. And it's just like, but we are people, Black women are people. Yeah. And so why is it that when we're writing a book that is only about a woman of color, this is a woman of color book. But when it is from a white author, it's a book for the masses. And so I think normalizing Black art as mainstream art, because Black culture is American culture, and just in any type of work that someone does from a marginalized background, it's really important to have that representation, because America is a melting pot. And so why is it that, you know, movies and TV and books and podcasts and radio DJs, like everyone should be represented in that way in every facet of our life.
You hit on something there, Ebony, that I really resonate with. And that's that, you know, Black culture is American culture. We are a melting pot. And depending on who you talk to, it's like, well, no, we got to, you know, stay in our own lane. As you say, you know, stay in your own lane. This group stays with this group. These people stay with these people. But really, and I come from the top 40 world where, you know, it was one of those things where it's mass appeal. But then you look at who are the artists that are getting played the most.
Yep.
You can't pick a majority skin color, because it could be Rihanna, it could be Jay-Z, it could be Kendrick, it could be Lady Gaga, it could be Billy, it could be Justin Bieber. It's Justin Bieber with Chance the Rapper and DJ Khaled.
Yes,
Hello,
yes.
Khaled. Khaled.
Yes.
So yeah, and it's such a beautiful thing, and that was one of the things I was most proud of, because, you know, I had a friend of mine who he is also a retired top 40 DJ. He does real estate now, and he and I would talk. He's Black, and he would talk about how his friends would joke around about him being at the white station. And it always rubbed me the wrong way, because I'm obviously not white, I'm brown. And I'm like, well, you know, what's a white station sound like? Because even if you were to go to what the stereotype of a white station would sound like, you go to country, but it's like, well, no, country's not only for white people. Right? So it's just this really weird rabbit hole that I think people can find themselves going down.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, publishing is also a very predominantly white space. And so when I came in, I'm coming in working at a historically Black college, because that's, you know, I went to a historically Black college because that's where I felt the most comfortable in. I felt like I could just be a student and not have to worry about, you know, being discriminated against because of the color of my skin. And working in a bookstore, it allowed me to learn about all types of authors. And so coming into an industry that is predominantly white, it was hard for them to understand how to market certain books by certain authors of color. And so that was one of the things that was important to me, was to show that if you have an invested interest in other cultures, you will be able to promote books. And I wasn't just promoting books by Black authors that were doing well. I was promoting books by, you know, Latinx authors that were doing well. I was promoting books by Asian authors that was doing well. And I'm like, I'm not from that culture. How is it that I'm able to learn and engage and figure out what the market calls for, and you can't, you know? So that was one of the things that I wanted to show in my work, was how to show that if I can do it, you can. And the same thing with Love Radio. I want to normalize, you know, a love story from a lens that we might not always see, but is equally as important.
Yeah. And speaking of, I definitely want to talk about Love Radio. So let's get the elevator pitch, seeing as how you're a marketing executive. So let's get it. Let's hear it. I've never heard of Love Radio. Why should I read it, even though I read it?
Okay, so Love Radio is about two teenagers, Danny Ford, who is an aspiring writer with dreams of moving to New York, and Prince Jones, who is a local Detroit DJ turned love expert, who was looking to pursue Danny. He's loved her since forever. Forever is like middle school for him. He finally convinces her, after a rocky meet cute, to go on 3 dates to hopefully fall for him, and sparks fly. So Love Radio is a story of love, but it's also a story of love for not just, you know, two people, but for your family, for your city, and most importantly, for yourself.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. And I want to begin with, because as a radio guy, it intrigued me, one, and it hooked me and got me addicted to finishing in almost record time. So what about what about this particular medium drew you into writing a story? Because for young people, it seems like radio is that thing that grandma and grandpa listen to.
So I was trying to think once, because I'm more of a character driven author or writer. So once I established the characters and I established that Prince would be he would be someone that gives love advice. I was trying to figure out the medium in which he would give the love advice. And thinking of teenagers, I felt like obviously social media would be the first thing that you would think of, but I wanted to stretch myself as an author a little bit. And one of the things that I kept coming back to was growing up in the Detroit metro area and going to school and work with my mom in the car, and we listened to radio, and we listened to, Donnie Simpson, and we listened to Mason in the Morning, which is a local Detroit DJ, and, Ricky Smiley, all these radio hosts, and they would have like celebrity gossip, they would have pranks, and then they would have not the greatest sometimes love advice, but they would have it on there. And I thought, it would be so cool if, as we're thinking about teenagers and how teenagers are always going to shape and change this world, if there was a teenager who was a love expert on a local station, and he had a massive following because he was actually good at what he did. Like, you could already see his star rising. And once I did that, I was like, okay, I have to write about Detroit because radio and music is such a staple in the community. And then I had to do research because I'm like, do teens still listen to radio? And yes, streaming platforms are the thing. But I was quite surprised upon research because teenagers are still listening to radio because, there are certain DJs that they like. At a certain point, sometimes you're flipping through, Spotify or Tidal or whatever, and you're just like, I just need someone that I know can curate the type of music that I want. When you get a good DJ, like, your whole mood, your whole vibe changes. And I think, D Nice and like all of the DJs during COVID that were spending, that was a really good example of people wanting to tune in and like listen to someone who plays the music exactly that they want to hear at the time they want to hear it.
What character do you relate to the most?
So obviously it's Danielle. Danielle, like myself. It's funny because she writes to some literary greats, which you touched upon earlier, and I did not, because I didn't have the confidence to do that. But I actually still have the journals that I had from when I was a teenager, and I was really shy. That's why I love reading, and so I would write in my journals as I was trying to process any feelings that I had. And it was really, therapeutic going and reading those journals in today's time. I was also a bit of a recluse at some point in my teenage life. But then on the flip side, when it came to Prince, my nickname growing up was Mama Eb because I was always dishing out romance advice to my friends. And I realized it was more like advice on self-love. So for me, it's like, you're the catch. He ghosted you, don't call him back. Like, I was the one saying like, no, you stand true to yourself. You deserve to be courted. You deserve to be wooed. And so I think I put a lot of that into Love Radio. I wanted Prince to be this like charming, lovable character because I wanted him to woo Danielle. I wanted to show girls that you can get the love that you want. You can be swept off your feet.
What did you learn about yourself going back to those old journal entries?
I learned how I was surprised at how self-assured I was. I think like, you grow up, you become an adult, and you think back on your teenage self, you're like, oh, I was so insecure, I was so this, I was so that. But the things that I held, that I stood firm on, I really stood firm on those things. And I had strong opinions. I just didn't know how to express them. And that carried on until much of my, early 20s too. I was, working in an industry that was very intimidating and having to stand up for things that were wrong, injustice that I was seeing in the type of books that were being published. If they didn't feel comfortable working on something, if someone, said or did something that was a little problematic, when you're in a creative industry, so much of it is opinion based. Like, I always say, it's not like being a scientist. You have the facts. So at the end of the day, someone can try to argue back and forth all they want to, but the facts matter. And creative spaces, it's my opinion versus yours. And so working in an industry where people are telling me what will not sell from people that I know, I had to find my voice. And so it was really nice to know that that voice was always there. I just didn't know how to express it verbally.
One of the things that I loved the most about the story was the donut scene. And I mean, it was like the most Hallmark thing I read in several months. I absolutely loved it.
Thank you.
How many passes did it take for you to get that particular part right?
That part, right? Actually, that part was really easy for me to write. And I don't know, I don't want to say like that was nothing, but it was easy and fun. And I'm a foodie. So, living in New York was a whole problem because I was just always eating everything. So, and working in a publishing, especially entry level, you're not getting paid much. So I was broke, but I was like, I'm gonna find a way to eat this amazing donut. Like, so that part was really easy. And I definitely feel like I'm eating things at times without giving too much away, and seeing people react to me eat. It's like, Ebony, you are enjoying that way too much. And I'm like, I know. So I think that's why it was so easy for me to write it.
That's great. Bit of a rapid fire before we wrap up the interview, Ebony. What's your favorite place to write?
Favorite place to write? I think my favorite place to write is just by my desk, by a window. And I wouldn't even say my desk, just any desk by a window that allows me to just look out and dream, and also kind of people watch or, scene watch along the way. Like, that's my favorite place to write.
Do you write longhand or with a laptop?
Our laptop.
What is harder to write, the first sentence or the last?
Oof, the last.
Stranded on a desert island with only 2 books, one fiction, one nonfiction. Which are
books? They? Oh no!
That's it. 2. You get 2.
Oh, I do not like this question. I would say, oh no, this is not rapid fire. I know you're asking me. It's
no,
like
that's fine. I don't even know why I call it rapid fire. I just,
2 books.
Let me add an amendment to the question. You eventually get off the desert island.
Okay. So 2 books of the moment. Oh gosh. Okay. I'm going to say nonfiction. I'm sorry. It has to be something that helps me to survive. So that's what my nonfiction, whatever that is, nonfiction, whatever that is, that would be it. And then fiction, I'm going to say of the moment, Their Eyes Are Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. Absolutely. That's one of my early love stories that I love.
Have you ever been on the radio? And if so, in what context?
Oh, that's a good question. I have not. I've actually tried to call in a few times to win things on the radio, but I just never had any great luck with it. So I'm always one of those people listening to the radio. Like, it's like, okay, name a song that starts with truth. I'm always the one that can like immediately say it, but I'm never the one that gets to be able to call it. And I feel like if I did, I would have messed it up anyway. So,
It's hard to get through. It really is. I've tried.
It is. It's annoying. So I just gave up, and now I just, maybe, but I am now. So it's great.
Yeah. Well, Ebony, it's been so much fun talking with you. Where can all my friends listening get a hold of you and find out more about what you're up to?
Sure. So I am on all the social platforms at Ebony LaDelle. You can learn more about me at ebonyladelle.com, and Love Radio is available any and everywhere books are sold.
Get it. Love Radio is the novel. Ebony, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.